This is actually one for Guy, but I'll ask you.
Okay.
I was going to ask Guy how it was that he took these teachings and this from an academic point of view and translated into his life. But no, I know your trend, but my real question is, for me, this what feel like are subtle distinctions, and my mind doesn't have that quite academic mind, or at least that's the way that I've limited that. Feels like the energy and the effort to make those fine distinctions feel like I have plenty to work with without knowing more of what feels a bit esoteric about the distinctions between even the different schools. And so I lose a little bit of what feels like the practical application of some of the distinctions.
Okay. I'm not sure I completely understand. You're saying that so you can't, making such subtle distinctions doesn't necessarily seem so relevant to you according
in terms of practice.
In terms of
how to
practice.
translate that into what's meaningful or practical, or what would make a difference in terms of my having a better understanding. So, and maybe some of it is just a mental block or not feeling like I have that precision to it. And so, especially when I listen to others and their capacity for that, they have in the way lower capacity. And so sometimes feel quite lost, and I know, yes, those are great imprints, but sometimes I lose energy about that in terms of going, why am I listening for those subtle distinctions where I have all these real gross things that I haven't got?
Okay, yeah. So why am I learning all these subtle, fine points of philosophy when my mind is like so gross and
Yes.
yeah. So, well, the thing is, I think, is to practice where you're at, but you learn the future steps so that when you've kind of completed the practice of where you're at, then you already have the knowledge for how to practice at a deeper level. You see what I mean? So it's like, you know, you may be taking a cooking class and you're learning how to boil eggs, but you can still read books about, you know, how to make ice cream and chocolate cake, even though you're not at that level yet. And it seems so detailed and complicated. But the thing is, you know, you're learning it, so you're getting some idea of where to go. And when you've mastered boiled eggs, you won't have to start over at the beginning, you know, with, well, what do I do now? Because you'll already, at least intellectually, have some kind of idea about where to go. Yeah? Does that make some sense to you? Yeah? Because the thing is, as you think about these things more, I mean, it's true at the beginning, it's like, why are they making all this picky stuff? But as you think about it more, then some of these questions naturally appear to your mind. And then, if you've done that study, then you go, oh, that's why they were talking about that. Yeah? But many of these things, it's like, in my experiences, I don't understand until way later. Yeah? But then kind of the light bulb goes on, and you see why it's important. Yeah?
I keep being confused about the issue of whether Buddha's, is it no conventional truth? We've talked about that.
Yeah.
And because I thought, or conventional reality, or whatever, that it's really only all made up of imputations by each of us imputing, all beings imputing. And so what would there be for a Buddha to know? In a way, I know I'm coming from.
Oh, you're like the ones we were talking about who say conventionalities are only for confused people, and Buddhas only know ultimate truth.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, Buddhas can help us, so obviously they have some access to something. So I guess the question is what or how. But more coming from the perspective of what would a Buddha know in terms, if conventional reality is just all an imputation, it doesn't really exist from the.
Wait, okay, that's where you need to start. Okay, when you say it's just imputation, so it doesn't really exist, okay? So it's imputation, so it doesn't truly exist, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay, right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so conventional reality does exist, not truly, only conventionally, and the Buddha can perceive it.
So the way it exists conventionally
Uh-huh.
is
Dependent,
dependent on minds,
right,
beings.
right?
So a Buddha would have to, so it's like, how could a Buddha know conventional reality in some way separate from the minds that are, in a sense,
Okay,
formulating it?
well, in one way, he knows conventional reality as seen by sentient beings, and that's where we say that the Buddha can, you know, see true existence because he sees what we see, which is true existence.
Through our eyes.
Yeah, yeah. But like what Guy was saying, when we talk of, like, you know, the 10 qualities of a Buddha or the 4 fearlessnesses or things like that, those are things that are pure phenomena that only a Buddha apprehends directly. They're imputed by the lower level bodhisattvas who still have conceptual mind. Yeah, they conventionally exist, but the Buddha, you know, they only are known directly by a Buddha's mind, and so a Buddha would see them as, you know, sees them as empty and also dependent. I mean, that's the only way I can make sense out of it, is that the Buddha, you know, sees them on a conventional level as dependently arising. Now, what that would look like, I have no idea.
Okay, I think I was forgetting about the fact that there's a pure version of conventional reality.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the
Right, but-
our impure.
Okay, but even our impure version, you know, when the Buddha looks at it, you know, he may see the true existence because we see it, but when he looks at the table, he's not going to see the table as truly existent. So he'd see the table, or she'd see the table as a dependent arising.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And it probably would look very different than the way the table looks to us.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
yeah.
you see the causes and conditions? I mean, wouldn't a Buddha just see all of the energy, the causes and conditions
Yeah.
that made that come, not the table itself,
Well, the Buddha would see all of it.
and the table? Because
Yes.
we see the table as a table.
And also because the table's there.
Okay, that's what I was getting at.
I mean, the table exists. It doesn't truly exist, doesn't ultimately exist, but it exists. So the Buddha's omniscient, he's got to know the table.
Okay, I might be slipping into like maybe Chitta Macha, where I was thinking the only table that exists is the one that's in your mind, your mind, your mind, your mind, your mind, my mind.
Yeah, now it's true that there's no objective table out there independent from all of our minds. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. But you can't say that the only table that exists is, you know, what appears to each of our minds. Because they say there are external objects, you just can't find them when you look for them with ultimate analysis. And that's hard, you know. Yeah, there's external objects, but when you look for them with analysis, you find that they aren't there. Then why do you call them external objects? Because what we think external means objectively existent. Because from our perspective, if it's external, it seems objectively existent. But that's not the meaning. Yeah?
Or would it be the meaning like,
Something that's not conjoined with consciousness.
okay, so like, I don't, would you use the word aggregate for that even, or, no, 5 aggregates, but like no aggregate?
Well, or you would say the floor, for example. Yeah. Or you could say, you know, the body. You could say that too. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to this thing that as soon as we say existent, we think truly existent. And as soon as we say empty, we think totally non-existent. Yeah? I mean, that kind of thing comes again and again. Yeah?
I was wondering, I may have trouble formulating the question, but it seems like the way it's taught is that the foundation of traversing the path to Buddhahood is reliance on the spiritual mentor.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like when we get into analysis and Madhyamaka philosophy and how to actually analyze to understand ultimate reality, talk of the spiritual mentor isn't really there. And then it comes back in Tantra, which is like really the highest view.
Oh, okay.
So like where does reliance on the spiritual mentor come in with analyzing?
Okay. Okay, so we hear at the beginning, reliance on the spiritual master is the root of the path. When we get to the chapter on emptiness, we don't really hear much about the spiritual master. And then when we come back to Tantra, it's like, you know, the gurus, the Buddha, and, you know, like that. Just because when we're talking about emptiness, it doesn't talk about the spiritual master, doesn't mean that it's not important. It was taught earlier in the path, because who's going to explain the correct view to you? Yeah? How are you going to learn the correct view? And well, I'll just pick up a book and read it. Well, are we going to get the right view by, you know, can we pick up Chandrakirti and understand him correctly? Even, you know, can we pick up Jay Rinpoche and understand him correctly? Yeah, so, you know, when we look, we really need help in understanding what these great sages are saying. And so who is it who helps us? It's the spiritual mentor. Yeah, and so because that person is teaching us the view that if we're able to correctly realize it will enable us to be free of cyclic existence, then, you know, automatically the respect and appreciation comes. Because how else am I going to learn this? Do you get what I mean? Yeah?
And why is it, like in some systems, taught that, you know, you can proceed solely on devotion to the spiritual mentor without, you know, focusing that much on this kind of study and
Oh, okay. So why do some people teach you that you progress solely by devotion to a spiritual master and not through study? I don't think there's too many systems that teach that. Because if you look, I mean, even in Tantra, you know, the guru is very important, but to do Tantra you have to study, and you have to have that based on all the sutra teachings that you've learned through study. So it's not just this thing of, you know, oh, well, somebody said the guru is Buddha, so Ali Ali Salami, I believe that and I worship, and through that I'm going to get enlightened. Because, you know, that kind of attitude doesn't remove our self-grasping, doesn't remove our self-centeredness. Sometimes it even increases our namtok. Yeah? So it's important to understand what this all means in a correct way. Yeah? So, and that's why I don't like the expression guru devotion, because we think of devotion as just this blind worship. And similarly, you know, translating it as guru worship, you know, the guru puja is guru worship, I don't like that translation either, because we just have this, or at least I have the connotation of worship as like it's just, yeah, Ali Ali Salami with no understanding. And we're not going to get anywhere on the path that way. You know, we've done that for many, many lifetimes in the past. And we're still here. Okay, so it's not a process of just blind devotion and stuff like that. It's, you know, when we appreciate the teachings, then we appreciate the role of the spiritual mentor, because that person opened the door to the teachings for us because we couldn't understand the teachings by ourselves. But it doesn't mean that just blindly worshiping the person of the spiritual mentor is going to help us understand the teachings. It's, using our own wisdom and developing, the ability to think and investigate and analyze that's going to develop that understanding. But also at the same time, if we just approach emptiness in a basically kind of intellectual way, analysis, intellectual person, I'm just going to analyze to death because I have a high IQ and I'm going to get it. That doesn't work either, because the kind of wisdom and intelligence we need in Buddhism is different than the IQ measurement they do in secular topics. And somebody can have no rocket science, and when it comes to Buddhism, they can't even get the fact that lying is a negative action. It's a different kind of intelligence and wisdom that we're developing, and to develop the kind of Dharma wisdom and intelligence that we need, having an attitude of respect for our teacher and accumulating merit and doing purification and all these kinds of practices are very, very good for softening the mind and opening the mind so that when we hear the teachings we can understand them. That's why Manjushri set Jay Rinpoche to do retreat. Yeah, and he did 3.5 million prostrations, 100,000 prostrations to each of the 35 Buddhas, and he did gazillions of mandala offerings and all sorts of guru yoga practices, because those are the things that purified and created merit and made the mind receptive, so that then he could actually understand the teachings. Yeah, so I think we have to approach the path with this combination of, both using intelligence and wisdom and having an attitude of faith and confidence and respect and appreciation that all are developed on the basis of understanding the teachings and that are not blind. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Huh? No more questions, good. Guy, what did you think of my answers? Feel free to correct it.
No, it's very helpful. Thinking of, in terms of Kevin's question, I don't really, it's very hard for me to say whether studying all this has helped me personally or not, frankly. And I don't think it's hurt me. And it's certainly been interesting, and I think, and I think I could say, here's the thing. Last time when I talked about the two truths, I said, we argued about whether this was a right statement or not, but I said it's not really like a basic practice. There isn't the meditation on the two truths per se. It's this whole way of thinking about how does emptiness relate to conventional reality. It's sort of like, how can we do the practices that are necessary without having one damage the other? And so it's like thinking about these things is, I guess it's an aspect of practice in that it's like a way of keeping your understanding of reality damage the idea that there are these distinctions between lying and not lying, or becoming, so attached to the way things appear at the conventional level that you can't understand emptiness. And so, I guess, I have very limited ability to say about how this has benefited me personally, but I can say more about like what attracts me to it is that I find it a very coherent way of making sense of the world and resolving the tension that I feel between my sense and conviction that there really isn't anything graspable. And on the other hand, needing to not have that contradict ethics or common sense. And it's like, but then how do you explain that? And it seems to me that Tsongkhapa did better at doing that than other people, and so that's why I guess I find it useful, because it's like I think it is a big part of the way I think about the world just comes from the way he solved the problem. And I mean, it's related to this question about like just if there's nothing that we can do because everything is just an illusion, and then there's God or Buddha who knows the truth on the other side, and we wait for a light to come down or something like that, then this is another way of looking at the world religiously that seems actually a lot more popular. I mean, not just outside of Buddhism, but even within Buddhism. But it doesn't work for me. So then, okay, so, you know, but then I feel a spiritual inclination, but no ability to have any faith in some, you know, kind of essentially real, absolute power that's behind it all. And so then what's left is a kind of thing like this that seems to solve a lot of problems for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have a question, if we can. Mostly I just want to ask for some elaboration on this quote. Therefore, dependently arisen phenomena carry out functions only from the perspective of names and terms. So it's the functionality question that I kind of always get hung up in. If we conceive of a phenomena and it performs a certain function, somehow I feel like the function is inside that phenomena, that must be the thing that exists. So actually understanding where functionality falls into this name and term thing, which I don't really get anyway, but I played it.
Yeah.
Where does that fit?
Okay. So where does functionality fit within things existing by mere name? Okay. So when we say mere name, it doesn't mean that there's just names. Yeah, it means that things exist in relationship to the mind. Okay. And functionality, you said, you know, it seems like, okay, if something performs that function is inside of it, and so therefore it has some inherent nature. Okay, well that's what it looks like from our viewpoint, that this cup, you know, has the function of holding water from its own side. But if you ask an ant, yeah, first of all, the ant doesn't call it a cup, and it wouldn't see it as having that function. Okay? So it only has that function in relationship to us who have the karma to see it that way. Also, it only has that function in relationship to water, in relationship to the table, in relationship to the clay, in relationship to plates. You know, things don't have a function in and of themselves because they only function in relationship to things that aren't them. Okay? So it's this whole thing of relational dependence that His Holiness talks about, how long and short are dependent on each other. But it's what I was saying the other night, that anything that we talk about exists within an environment, and its identity depends on that entire environment. It isn't something that has some characteristics and identity in and of itself separate from its environment.
So here's where I get into trouble. Maybe I'm sure I'm making it very solid, but you know, in the exercise of trying to you know, look at a cup and identify what's the basis of designation of this label cup, then I've got one cup, one lid, one bottom, one thing, one there, and the function doesn't really go into that.
Yeah,
but
right.
But
yeah, the function isn't there in the lid, in the sides, and the bottom of the cup. The function isn't there, is it?
Totally my concept. Right?
Yeah. Well, the function, you label a cup, but the function exists in relationship to everything else. If there weren't water, the function of the cup couldn't be to hold it.
Right, so the basis of designation is separate from looking at that other kind of, is a different way of viewing it than stepping back and looking at it in its relational dependence to other things. Is that right?
Well, we're trying to look at something from many, many different viewpoints. And one is, if you think the function is in the object, is to analyze the parts and see if any of the parts has that function. Okay? So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to say, well, why do I think it has this function at all? On what basis do I say that the cup has the function to hold water? Well, on the basis of there being water, on the basis of there being gravity, because, the cup has to go up and the water goes down, and on the basis of there being a table that you put the cup on, because if there were no planet or table, you wouldn't have a cup that has water, and, there's this whole environmental thing that's going on. And then on what basis does it function to hold water? Also because I'm a human being.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's very helpful.
And the karma through which I have to look at it. I look at this and, these are very meaningful. Yeah, they function very well when I try and see things. If you ask, Maitri the cat, these are useless, The only function they are is to clutter the table when you're trying to get to the cheese. Yeah. Yeah, or their only function is to knock off the table when you're bored. Okay? So you can see, they don't have an inherent function inside of them. Yeah.
So that relates to what is a valid cognizer too.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to mean that every cognizer has to agree on.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't mean every sentient being in the universe agrees on what this thing is and what to call it and how it functions. Yeah, that's why sometimes I think valid cognizer, the word valid for me appears a little bit truly existent. It's a valid cognizer. From its own side, it's valid. And I like the translation reliable cognizer better, because it's reliable in the sense that you know what you can do with this thing. Yeah? It doesn't mean that it has some inherent valid nature, but it's just reliable because you know what you can do with it. Okay.
Like a preda doesn't need to validate the.
What?
Like a preda doesn't need to validate that object.
No, because a preta, this wouldn't appear as a glass of water. A cup of water would appear as a cup of, pus and blood. So valid is according to, a group of sentient beings who have particular karma to see things in a particular way. From the preta's view, they would see pus and blood, and that's a valid cognizer from the viewpoint of a preta. And when a god sees, celestial, bliss, nectar in it, that's a valid cognizer from the viewpoint of that celestial being. Okay? So there can be many valid cognizers of a single base. That's why it's better to say reliable cognizer. Yeah, it's a reliable. Yeah.
I was going through using that.
Yeah.
The new translation, you'll love. Epistemic instruments.
Yeah, I've read that and I said, no. That it's an instrument. It's like, like a violin or something.
Instrument means instrumentality, means of knowing, and epistemic means the knowing part.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's the current fashion among the philosophical people.
It almost sounds like you're creating a language just to keep us common folk to not understand.
Yeah. You can say, reliable knower, reliable source of knowledge, reliable cognition. I think those are all better than valid. It turns out that valid has a technical meaning in Western logic that doesn't really correspond to what we're trying to say anyway.
The technical meaning of valid doesn't correspond to the phrase valid cognizer?
That's my understanding, right? I mean, it has to do with certain qualities of a proof, and it's not really to do with what we're trying to say, is that this is an authoritative, something, a source of information that you can count on is all we're really trying to say.
Yeah.
I like that, source of information. I think the really nice thing, Julia and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and was like going, okay, so we wind around, we start off with Arjuna, who posits himself the problem of attachment, and then how do you break that attachment? And then he gets into the emptiness, because that worked for him. And then you go down several centuries later and come around to Tsongkhapa, and he starts talking about functionality. Things function, and then where my mind goes is, okay, well, I'm a functioning being in a functioning world, and so how does this help me, in my aspirations to get rid of my attachments? But listening to what you were just saying now about the context, the interdependent context, that is really helpful, because that promotes, to me, that promotes ethics. If you see things as individual and self-sufficient, and that's over there and I'm over here, then you really don't have a basis in that, a real basis in that for ethical behavior. But if you see everything as being interdependent, and then you start getting into this Shantideva world of, why do I call this my foot? So I like that. I think, it's good.
Yeah. Good. Anything else? Then, okay.
I don't think I quite understood the explanation and the meaning, really, of when you were explaining the second verse in Nagarjuna.
Oh, the one about going.
Yeah, the one about the tricycle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's like one of those math puzzles, you get in 7th grade or something. So like, it's like we say, I'm going. Okay. Now, what do we really mean? Where does by I'm going, and where does the going take place? Okay? So if this is my foot, and I lift it up, where is the going? If I start out here on this side of the line, and is going there, where is the going actually taken place? Because half of my foot hasn't gone, half of my foot has already gone. So where's the point where my foot is actually going?
It's like, where's the prostration in a prostration?
Yeah.
Which part?
Yeah.
And that was more of like a where, like a location-related one.
Yeah. But it's kind of an interesting thing when you're walking and you say, I'm going. Where actually is the going happening? Because we all get somewhere. But where is the going happening? And is the going happening in the past, in the present, in the future? Yeah, because if it happens in the past, then it's the have gone. If it happens in the future, it's the will go. In the present, where are you going to identify the going?
And how long is your present?
Yeah, I mean, the present is the only thing we have that we live in, but how do we identify it? Because our minds want to, you know, make a square around it and then freeze it so it doesn't change into the past. But just already by talking about it, it's already gone. Yeah.
In Tai Chi, they have a thing about, you know, when you shift your weight, that's when you are taking the step. There's all this stuff about shifting your body and taking the weight off the back of this foot, while this foot's not yet fully on the ground, and when this foot hits the ground, so when you release the other foot, when you no longer have your weight on that one, I mean, this is one of the same things.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Is it, you know, or it's like saying, when does an hour happen? Okay, an hour is made of 60 minutes. Well, when does the hour exist? Yeah, at the end of the 60th minute? Does the hour exist at the end of the 60th minute? No, because then the hour is already over. Isn't it? Yeah. Does it exist at the first moment of the first minute? It hasn't started. Does it exist midway between the 30th minute? No. Yeah. So when do we have an hour?
3.5.
I mean, what really is an hour?
So we start unpacking these things with analysis and start seeing that we really, life is an incredible mystery. So
Yeah.
the quote that I heard recently, they're saying, you know, we know in science things in the extremes, like extremely big things like universes and extremely small things like atoms, but what we don't know is what happens to the cream when it goes into the cup of coffee. That our mundane reality is full of these mysteries that are completely unexplored.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that we're trying to make everything into nice little packets with lines about them, around them. And none of these packets depend on any of the other packets. And we're trying to do that, and it doesn't work because things don't exist that way. Yeah. And, you know, in the same way, I mean, just on a practical level, I find it always fascinating to say, you know, because the word my comes up so much. Yeah. What is mine about this? You know? My reputation. What is mine about a reputation? What is a reputation? Yeah. Yeah. My what? My pen. What is mine about this pen? And yet giving it the word mine makes a huge difference between not giving it the word mine. But what is mine about this pen? And we say, my friends. What is mine about that other person? What is mine? Yeah. So, you know, all these kinds of things, when you really start questioning them, I think they loosen up our mind that wants to hold on to everything so tightly. Yeah? It actually provides a lot of space. You know, there's nothing mine inside my relatives. There's nothing mine inside my possessions. In fact, there's nothing mine inside my body. And there's nothing mine inside of my ideas. Oh my goodness. And there's nothing mine inside of my emotions. Yeah? So, you know, if you think about that, then whoa, there's just a lot, it's a lot easier in life, I think. Whereas, you know, when everything is, you know, as soon as we give the word my or mine to something, you know, this whole ton of meaning gets imputed on it that it doesn't have from its own side. And that way of living is so difficult. Yeah?
Yeah, as you talk, it just seems like we screwed it all up by creating language. It feels like all these obscurations are created because we need a way to talk
Yeah,
about the book that happens to be in my possession more than it's in your possession.
yeah,
You know, and as soon as we put a label to it, as soon as we put a word to it, it seems like it's
yeah.
completely lost.
The problem isn't our giving words to it. The problem is forgetting that we were the ones who gave the words. Yeah? If we always remembered that we were the ones who labeled and conceived something, they wouldn't be problems. But we forget, and instead we think that they have a nature out there independent from us. That's what gives the problem.
It's like a diagnosis.
What do you mean?
I'm constantly having that conversation with people who have been diagnosed with mental illness because they hear depression and they reify. This means.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, giving mental diagnosis sometimes makes things so much worse. And especially, have you noticed now, every child has a disorder. If you don't have a disorder, you're not like everybody else. But when you have a disorder, then there's something wrong with you. So now you have original sin plus a disorder. I mean, we're really making it hard for kids. Original sin wasn't bad enough. Yeah, but everybody, you know, you're not a kid who is exuberant and hasn't learned rules. You have what is it, an obstinate, defiant disorder or something, whatever they call it, you know? And it's like, oh my goodness, as soon as the kid gets that designation, it's like, well, then I'm hopeless. I'm totally hopeless. I have this designation, or this disease, this disorder.
But that's what we do anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
we do this ourselves. This is, to me, you know, what I think is the miracle of, you know, the purification practices is to remind myself that that I'm not any particular way, you know, I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, because if I have these memories of being an angry, obstinate person, and I say, oh, I am an angry, obstinate person, then I can't change from being an angry, obstinate person to a bodhisattva. So,
Yeah.
so the beauty of the purification practice is to try to break through that, you know,
Yeah.
same thing, saying
Exactly.
it's a diagnosis. It may not have a Latin name to it, but it's still a diagnosis.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
how do I change? Well, I'm changing all the time anyway, so.
Yeah. So if I'm going to make a little bit more additional commentary about modern society, you know, in addition to original sin, and in addition to a disorder, if we say that this is all caused by genes, then forget it. Then we really can't change. You know? If my anger is caused by my genes, if my alcoholism is caused by my genes, if whatever problem I have, you know, is caused by my genes, then I can't change at all. And, you know, and I think that's really, really dangerous, and people give up personal responsibility.
And it's also
Yeah.
not scientifically accurate, because your genes are changed by you.
Yeah.